Welcome to The Focused View, the podcast for eye care professionals across Australia. Brought to you by Opticare. In each episode, we bring together leading eye care, optical and business professionals to share valuable insights, practical tips, and the latest trends shaping the optical business landscape. I'm your host, Michael Nasser, and together we'll explore innovative strategies for practice growth, patient care, and business success in the eye care industry. Whether you're starting your career, managing a practice, or just looking to stay ahead of the field, The Focused View is your source for inspiration and knowledge. In today's episode, we're joined by Luke Arundel, Chief Clinical Officer at Optometry Australia, to tackle the critical yet often overlooked topic in the optometry field: protecting your practice from cyber threats and legal pitfalls. With cyber attacks on the rise and increasing legal complexities, many optometrists may not realize just how vulnerable their practices are. Luke brings a wealth of knowledge on both the clinical and cybersecurity fronts, offering invaluable insights into safeguarding your practice from ransomware, phishing attacks, and compliance issues. We'll explore practical steps you can take to defend against these risks, as well as strategies for staying compliant with privacy regulations and managing legal risks. This is an episode every practice owner needs to hear, so let's jump in. Luke, welcome to the show. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much for having me.
For the context of our listeners, getting to know you is a pretty important part of the journey to begin with. So can you start by telling us a bit about your background and your journey in the field of optometry?
Yeah, I sure can. Look, I'm a Northern Territorian by birth, and a QT grad from back in 1998. I drifted into the world of contact lenses as getting these myself was, for me, a life-changing moment. I'm a huge music fan. In the late 90s, I was very much into grunge, metal, and bands like Nirvana. It was on my fourth trip to the uni eye clinic to replace broken glasses that the student optometrist there very kindly suggested that maybe spectacles, crowd surfing and mosh pits wasn't a great mix, so he fit me with my first contact lenses. I've always really enjoyed being able to share that sense of visual freedom and liberation from glasses with my patients, and for me that led me down the pathway of becoming a specialty contact lens practitioner. I've been lucky to work across a broad section of industry, working here and in Ireland, and I've spent time in the contact lens design and manufacturing field at Capricornia, along with public health at BHVI and ACO. Right now, I'm working as the Chief Clinical Officer at Optometry Australia, and I look after things like Medico-legal, members in trouble, media, and special projects.
Yeah, that's pretty extensive, and I guess approaching optometry from a different angle, from the point of view of that legal context, and a lot of the things that we're speaking about today will be very much of that nature.
Yeah, it's been a real eye-opener.
In our sort of discussions before today, you did mention that you're still practicing as well from memory. Is that still the case?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, became an optometrist because I like helping people. I'm still a real optom, as you would want from a chief clinical optometrist. I work part-time with contact lens guru Dave Foresto up in Brisbane. And yeah, still enjoy being in the real world and in the trenches, so to speak.
Yeah. And I guess that experience in both clinical and policy with regards to, you know, the legal side of things gives you an interesting perspective. What do you find most rewarding about the current role that you have with Optometry Australia?
Yeah. Well, look, I like helping people. I found that obviously in the optometry sector and particularly specialty contact lenses, you get a lot of wow moments from patients, particularly when you're doing complex contact lens fitting. For your keratoconus, for example, many of them haven't seen clearly for years. So, you might be bringing them from count fingers back down to 7.5 or 6.6. So, it's incredible. I had a patient the other day, he was like feeling his arm hair because he hadn't seen it for a long time, and we went outside and had a look at trees, and he's like, I just assumed they were just blurry blobby green things. He hadn't actually seen leaves in that fine detail for a long time. Or you might have a aphakic cataract baby who's never actually seen properly until they get their first contact lenses. So there's a lot of wow moments there. I like helping people at OA. I really enjoy that job because I get to help more than one person at a time. I like the big picture stuff, and I certainly love the industry. I want to make sure it's heading in the right direction.
And today in particular, we're going to talk about protecting practices from cyber threats. And that's really, I think, a massive area. But I guess just before we get into that, can you explain a little bit more in detail with regards to your role at Optometry Australia and the sort of things that you're actually doing there? So what does that involve in a day-to-day basis, just to put it into context for people that are listening so they can really understand and grasp, I guess, the perspective that you can bring to the equation in this regard?
Yeah, sure. My original role at OA was National Professional Services Manager. So, I guess the summary would be when you're in trouble, you call me. So, as far as insight, I've had visibility on every medico-legal claim in Australia in the 10 years that I've been there, and even going back to 17 years. And things like cybersecurity, I see these things as they happen. For me, it was 2017. We had the WannaCry virus. And I had someone call up and was like, Luke, I've got this weird message on my screen. Everything is locked. There is a countdown timer. It's saying that the payment's going to be doubled in 4 hours and that my files are going to be deleted in, 8 hours. And it wants me to deposit, $500 in Bitcoin to this address. What should I do? So, these things obviously I often will see emerging in real time. And, a lot of the work that I do now is looking at where are problem areas, how can we address CPD, or what do we need to plug gaps, whether it's looking after members, looking after the profession, trying to obviously assist on a broader scale. We still do the one-by-one assistance. We have a really excellent optometrist member team that does a lot of those calls these days. And I've gone into maybe some of the more complicated assistance, audits, investigation, medico-legal kind of work, and special projects where we look at, what can we do to be helping with this or addressing or circumventing this problem further on down the track. So that's how I ended up in the cybersecurity arena. It was direct assistance to members. It was a real eye-opener.
It's definitely something that's, I guess, a business owner's nightmare, is that description that you alluded to a little bit earlier, with that message coming up on the screen and some type of ransom and we hear about it a lot, but invariably we don't think it's ever going to happen to us. I think from your perspective and what you see, it's like you're getting these people that are actually, it's like, no, it happened to me. And our industry, and the one thing I'm learning via this podcast is there are so many facets to it. Obviously as an optometrist, when you're at uni and you're going through the motions, you're not necessarily thinking about what cybersecurity is and how it can impact you, obviously, from a business point of view. And as an independent optometry practice, if that's what you got, what you have, there's probably less and less infrastructure regarding that. And so if you're part of a group or a chain, they've probably got some IT resources and some allocation with regards to training, but it's that individual optom or, that runs their own small practice, or even if it's a larger practice, it's like, this is not something that you necessarily think about. So that's why today's topic for me is so important and so critical. And I'm really glad that we're going to get to shine some light on it.
And I'll be open and transparent. The bulk of the folk that are affected that we have assisted, we also have privacy breach cover and some other kind of covers around that area. But look, they're independents, and it's, I've got my son's friend to do the IT system because he's great at computers, that kind of stuff just doesn't fly anymore. And you hit the nail on the head, Michael. What we're talking about is accounts lost, patient records lost. So there's medico-legal issues. We might come to it a little bit later, but, there's obviously obligation now to inform the Privacy Commissioner around breaches. There's no exception for us. We deal in health information, sensitive information. There's no over $2 million turnover proviso. We're lumped into that area. You've got things like retesting at no charge, reputational issues. Think about it. You've got a patient calls up, Michael, I want to reorder 6 months supply of contact lenses, and you have to say to them, I have no idea who you are. We don't even have you on file. Come back in. We'll start again from scratch. We've got no continuity of practice. We have no idea what your change in health records is. This is at the end of the day a massive financial impact on a practice, and this is what I'm super keen to avoid. I've had those members on the other end of the phone, literally in tears. What the hell do I do? Like, how do I come
can
back
only imagine.
It's absolutely shocking.
Yeah. All right. So if we get into cyber threats in particular, and we'll speak about some other aspects as well with privacy and legal compliance, but if we start with cyber threats in particular, why are optometry practices particularly vulnerable to cyber attacks?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. And again, it's been a real journey for me trying to monitor this and stay ahead of it to assist members. But, first and foremost, it's because we're in the health sector. It's a favourite target of cyber criminals. It's typically number 2 on their list after finance. So they know health records contain sensitive information, which is valuable to them. So when we think about what's out there, and, this is where I really do enjoy my job because a lot of it's interesting. On the dark web, you can get a stolen credit card for $1 to $3. So that's what they're worth.
Wow.
A Medicare number, and I should point out to your listeners, all of our Medicare numbers are out there on the dark web. There's a massive leak in 2017. So if that Medicare hotline goes down, fine. You can just pop onto the dark web for $20 or $30. You can get any Medicare number that you want. And, what they find, particularly over in America, which is, further down the rabbit hole than we are, they talk about a complete health record or what the cybercrimes refer to as a FULS. That kind of thing is selling for $50 to $60. So when you think about where is the value, in this health information, I have cancelled 3 or 4 credit cards. I can do it at a snap of a finger. I can do it via the app now. It happens so often. They're not super valuable. The longevity of that information is limited, and hence that's only worth $1. A lot of the health information is used for identity theft and fraud, which is more valuable, and that's why they place higher information on it. And if you want to think about things like, again, going back to WannaCry 2017, they targeted a lot of hospitals. So they shut down everything. You've got people on respirators, you've got ambulances banking up in the driveway, and they know that those targets are vulnerable. And they hope that, for that reason, that folk will pay the ransom to get back online. So, they're, I guess, some of the components why the health sector is so appealing for these cyber criminals.
And what are some of the most common types of cyber attacks targeting optometry practices that you've seen?
Look, there's a bunch. It's malware and ransomware that are obviously the big ones, and perhaps those ones that have a large impact. But there's a huge range of stuff out there. We've got denial of service phishing, you got sphere phishing, which is, masquerading as a familiar entity. Business email compromise scams are certainly on the rise. The government's really concerned about those ones. You've got phreaking, that's hacking into a telephone system, and brute force attacks. So all of those things, unfortunately, are becoming more and more common.
Yeah. And not just, to be fair, independent practices, but obviously multinational organizations. I mean, in our industry, you may or may not be aware, but obviously there was and not to name the lab, but there was a lab that was involved in a relatively, big data breach too in that regard, and it shut down a lot of their worldwide operations for a period of time. So if it can happen and it happens to banks and it happens to, government agencies. So I guess, the reality of this happening and now highlighting why a cyber criminal will want to access the health information of individuals, it makes sense as to, anyone is really vulnerable in this particular instance.
You bet. And we mentioned before, there's obviously a lot of things that are affected, but at the end of the day, the world goes around with money. The Australian government talks about average cybercrime cost for a small business is $40,000, $88,000 for medium-sized businesses, and $900K for organisations. So, even just the downtime, getting back on track, disruption of services, let alone all that lost records and information, absolutely, it's really hitting these folk in the hip pocket.
Yeah. And I guess, having highlighted why cybercriminals are going after this type of information and knowing that it's happening more and more in the different types that you've just mentioned, how can practitioners start to build a defense against these threats? And what are some of the things that they can do in that regard?
Again, great question. Look, for me, the number one thing that I'd love your listeners to do is to start taking this seriously. It's here, it's now, stuff is going to get real. I mentioned, obviously, I'm following this for work, and, a pivotal moment for me, my light bulb moment, it was not that far ago. It was September 2023. I was looking through some notes for a cyber summit to see if I could extract anything useful for members. But what freaked me out, Michael, was that, there was a significant change in the language that the experts were using. And as I said, it was really my wake-up moment. So they were no longer talking about we should think about this in terms of if a cyber breach or a cyber attack happens. We should shift our thinking to, what is the reality these days. It's not if we're attacked, it's when. So, and for me, that really, I suppose, opened my eyes and it made me kind of rethink my approach. Like, I'm the privacy officer at OA. I definitely don't want that job. I would have loved to have had that job, 15 years ago, back in the wild days where this stuff was less complicated and we weren't having so many of these problems. But, it really is time to start paying attention. You really need to be thinking of cybersecurity preparedness as a system, rethink, approach to data retention. We don't need to hold on to things forever. And it's time to really be hardening our systems, which hopefully we can come to in a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I wanted to lead into. It's, some best practices with regards to cybersecurity. So if we're looking at some immediate steps that optometrists and I guess, optometry business owners in that regard, for a more general concept, if we want to look at some things that they can do to enhance their cybersecurity, what kind of steps would they be from a first instance? How can we help them?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's pretty straightforward. I don't want to say it's rocket science. There are some basic things that we can do right now. And, we're often doing some of them. We're doing some of them not necessarily 100%. And there's always work to be done. But number one's back up. When I'm talking to those people that have had their records locked, the problem was that they either weren't backing up. So, for some of these ones, look, they lose 2 or 3 days of data. That's a shame. That's not great. But we've had 3 years, 8 years, and, everything lost. So it's not just backing up, it's checking that backup data. In one case, they had a hard drive, but the hard drive was corrupted. They were just backing up onto this thing that was, 7 or 8 years old. Not good enough. So, think about cloud systems. There are issues with cloud systems. Where is that server? Are you in breach of APP8 or cross-border data protection laws? That, it does get a little bit complicated. The other bits and pieces, ensure your operating software is up to date. That's really the critical one. Have antivirus software and put it on auto update. It was interesting, again, the first one that I encountered, that WannaCry virus, it devastated the British health system. We pretty much dodged that bullet because when we woke up the day after, flicked on those computers, a lot of those auto updates just rolled straight in. They were patched. And, when there is an event, they're generally pretty good at getting onto it, identifying where the weakness is and then patching it. It's a matter of getting that patch into your system so that you're not vulnerable. So that auto update is really important. From there, it's looking at the other angle. So we've got our IT systems and we've got staff. So you can have the best systems in the world, but, in the health sector, 40% of this stuff is actually, it's our staff are our weakest link. They're letting these ones in through the back door. They're clicking on a suspicious link, and this is where it really comes down to staff training. It's not just you, they're out the front. They're getting a lot of those emails, and particularly the scam emails are getting a lot better these days.
Oh, I saw one that was pointed out from one of my staff members, and it had come from someone within the team. And it looked like it was, it was suspicious slightly, enough for him to call me and say, what's this about? I was like, oh, hold on. And obviously, I think in that instance, we just looked at the URL or the email sender, and we noticed that obviously isn't a legitimate sender. And although the rest of it was constructed in a way that looked like official correspondence, and at first glance, you would think it would be the case, and it wanted you to, and I was like, yeah, we would never ask for that. And so for me, again, speaking to that in particular with regards to staff being, one of your weaker links, I think that's critical, and training them obviously would be very, very important because they can let that slide in unintentionally, obviously, but with massive ramifications.
Yeah. And that's part of the training. It's often hovering over a link and looking at the address. Is it, Microsoft instead of Microsoft?
Yeah.
Something that's pretty close, but not quite there. And there's always a sense of urgency. I need this now. And that's part of trying to get them to not think about it and do it now. But so with that staff training, it is always, pause, have a breather,
That's right.
And think about it before you click on it.
I've said to you, I said, if in doubt, delete, or just refrain. Like, if in doubt, question. Like, don't.
Yeah.
If it doesn't sound right, don't proceed. We did mention there is some training in our past conversation Cyber Warden, I think was the name of that
Yeah.
particular training program. How effective is the Cyber Warden training program in improving cybersecurity awareness? And what does it actually, what is it? And can you speak to it a little bit?
Yeah, sure can. Let's be brutally honest. If your current staff level of training is 0, it's a crap ton better than where you are currently sitting at. So it is an entry point, Michael. In as far as what's its credentials, look, it is designed by our Cyber Protection Division, okay, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. They have recognised small business is vulnerable. We touched on that before. We don't have a corporate overlord with IT gizmos and whiz kids rolling out this stuff, making sure that we're up to date and demanding in SOPs that we, are doing these things that we should be doing. So small business has been identified. The Australian Retailers Association has paid for this course. It is a free online course. It is bite-sized modules. So it's perfect, and I really want to be suggesting, particularly at this time of year where some optometry practices are quiet, if you've got staff sitting there playing Candy Crush or doom scrolling on their phones, what a great time to be putting them to work, upskilling and protecting your business interests. A lot of this training is applicable for us in our day-to-day lives. I don't wake up these days without an overdue account from Linked or whatever on the text messages, and we all know we're getting absolutely hammered with them via email. So essentially, it's modules designed with small business in mind, and it's awareness training. So, part of the reason why I want to flag it is it's so digestible. We've made all our staff do it, certainly had great feedback. I've done it myself. It's a starting point. It is available online. Simply type in Cyber Wardens, and they are releasing more modules as we go. But, this is government-endorsed training for the small business sector. There's a raft of other things, like we have on the optometry website, optometry.org.au. In our OA Institute, again, we've had cyber experts talk about how to prepare your practice for this kind of stuff. We've also had webinars, lawyers, resources around what to do or how to prepare for privacy breaches, because there are obviously protocols that need to be followed. It's not a popular area for CPD, but it's really important.
Yeah.
And there's you can keep going onwards and upwards. I mean, you mentioned that email that you have, often with paid training, and again, plenty of modules there at fairly accessible price points, but they take that information, they take it to the next step. You'll have a month or 2 months where they send attack emails, so safe attack emails, where if the staff do click on them, what they typically get is they get sent to punishment training for why they made that mistake and how they could have avoided it. So that's the next level.
Right.
And when I talk to the folk that did our cybersecurity training, it's not a set and forget. You don't just do it once and that's it. They talk about you need a refresher every 6 months, or you want to keep it top of mind or keep it present, in your staff's mind so that they're always alert and aware for these things.
Yeah, and we'll definitely make those links available in the show notes if people want to check back in on those and access those. I think at the very least, if there's anything taken out of our conversation today, I think signing up, especially it seems like with the Cyber Wardens program, it's not a cost-related thing. Anyone can sign up and anyone can do it. And at the very least, if it's something that you're thinking about, we'd be encouraging anyone to do that, because it's only going to assist in at least the awareness component, which obviously is the starting point and allowing you to sort of develop.
Yeah, and the time investment for module one's not excessive either. It's 40 minutes, but you can do it in 6-minute chunks. So, very digestible.
Right. Okay, cool. We've spoken about some mistakes, obviously, with regards to maybe opening up an email or an attachment that perhaps, has come from a suspicious place. But when it comes to some common mistakes that you've seen with cybersecurity and maybe say with practices that have reached out to you, what are some of the more common ones that you've noticed?
It's the backups, to be honest.
Right.
If you've got a backup, you could take that system outside and take a sledgehammer to it, start again. You've got a small loss right then and there, but you just put your backup in, reboot, and keep rolling. So that is, really the number one thing. Number two is staff training. Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to highlight, I remember you mentioned that earlier, and I wanted to highlight that again. I think that's another really, sort of take home piece of advice for this episode. It's, if you're not doing backups, do them. Do you have I guess it's a matter of how long is a piece of string with regards to how often to be doing it, but do you suggest, that it's daily thing, a weekly thing, a monthly thing, and is it backed up onto a USB, or do you back it up onto an online platform? What are your thoughts on that point?
Look, I mean, most of the industry is moving to cloud. Again, you need to be careful with where those servers are, how secure are those servers. We've seen Google delete UniSuper's $250 billion worth of accounts the first time ever in something that couldn't happen and should never have happened. That's a huge boo-boo for them. UniSuper was saved by the simple and pure fact that they had a second backup with a different provider, and you wouldn't think you'd ever do that with Google. So it comes down to how much are you happy to lose.
Yeah.
So, daily, to be honest, is the minimum. We have a mirror server that's backing up every, I think, either hour or every second hour. It just depends on what are you willing to throw out the window. And for most folk, daily would really be a minimum. USB, a hard drive, that's not enough. Those things can get corrupted. You want to think about multiple backups, checking them frequently, and
I think multiple is critical. So it's not about having one; it's about having 2 to 3 just to cover yourself. And it only needs to happen once for you to have to learn that lesson. And hopefully, if you're taking these pieces of advice, you hopefully never have to learn that lesson, because it would, as we mentioned before, be quite an expensive one, especially for a small business. If we change tune slightly and we look at the privacy and the legal compliance, which obviously is something you've got experience with as well.
Yeah.
What are the major privacy regulations that have been introduced recently? And in light of those, can you give us some advice and some tips with what they are and how they affect us?
You bet. Look, I mean, setting the scene for what's out there, we've got a Privacy Act in the background that goes back to 88. The biggest recent, in quote mark, changes were the Australian Privacy Principles. That was 2014. They talk about, they're structured to reflect the information life cycle. So it's all about the collection, use and disclosure, quality and security, access and correction of data. There was the Privacy Amendment, which is the Notifiable Data Breaches bill, came in 2017. And there's obviously state and territory privacy laws, just to make things that little bit more complicated. But what I want to flag for listeners, February 2023, the Attorney General's Department released a report, and they detailed 116 proposals for upcoming legal changes. So this is, again, not a set and forget. This is a rapidly evolving area. Threats evolve. They adapt legislation to compensate for that. We're looking at a round of new legislative changes dropping pretty much anytime soon. Towards the second half of this year is the estimate. So it's a watch this space.
Yeah. With regards to privacy and legal compliance, how is it best to think about it? Because as you've mentioned, it is a massive area, and obviously it touches on all businesses, not just optometry practices. The most common way that I think about it is probably with, you say, your email EDMs or your marketing emails and things like that. With the context of with Optometry Australia and how they look at it, how do you see privacy and legal compliance, and how can it be best described to, practitioners and to people in the industry?
Michael, look, for your listeners today, I have a special treat. I have read thousands and thousands of pages of these legislative documents, and I am going to attempt to sum it all up for you in 25 words or less. Okay, I know you don't have a lot of time. So it basically comes down to this. If you handle information that can identify someone, make sure you collect, store, use, and share it safely and properly. So that is a summary of privacy legislation.
Got it.
Now, obviously, the devil's in the detail. You mentioned EDMs. We do those as well. And that comes down to the APPs. There must be an opt-out clause. And when we're dealing with the UK and EU, they've got, even more complicated privacy laws over there. So, for the business folk out there, I'm sure they'll be across those. Less of a problem for the optometry folk that are out there. And look, it's complicated.
Yeah.
I got a lawyer to come and do our webinar. And again, we've got that online on the OA Institute. But that's a slightly longer summary. That's a 40-minute summary. So that's a starting point. If privacy is not something that's on your radar, I would suggest, start with something like that. It's a little bit more digestible. Please be aware. I still talk to people that don't realize that they must have a privacy policy. Good Lord. We're supposed to have had those for years. So we have template privacy policies. We have this stuff for members. I realize it's not sexy. It's not interesting, but this is a requirement now for doing business in Australia. Times are changing, with electronic information, it's different. The chances of someone from North Korea, taking my old paper files from back in the day when I started were very, very slim. But, it's all changed now with the internet and with electronic information.
When one's setting up a business, one thing that we generally don't question is insurances. We're always taking out insurances. And I'm not speaking about specific, say, cyber threat insurance and privacy and compliance insurance, which I'm sure you can get. But it's, you always would have, insured your goods, you insure your car, you insure items. But I think one thing that I'm taking from this conversation is, as well as insurance, you now need to look at cybersecurity, privacy, and legal compliance just as critically as you would in taking an insurance policy to protect your business. This is just another aspect that just can't be neglected anymore.
Unfortunately, yeah. And cybersecurity is certainly a growth industry.
Yeah. So if we're sort of going back to those privacy and legal compliance components, how can optometry practices ensure that they comply with the regulations, obviously, that exist, and I guess to a lesser extent, the ones that are proposed, obviously, which we don't know, but more for the ones that exist? What are some things that they can do?
Yeah, look, probably for me, one of the weak spots in the profession is around referrals. For whatever reason, fax is still regarded as secure. Email is not secure. Technically, if we're sending things over email, and this is where I really hate legislation, because they talk about you must take reasonable steps. What the hell is reasonable? Where is that defined? But I mean, it's essentially what the average practitioner or a competent practitioner would have done. So, even things like email, we just need to be that much more sensitive about it. Is it a test email? Is it sending that referral encrypted with a password and sending the password via a different mechanism? The secure messaging systems are a nightmare in Australia, and this is something for me, it was 2016. The government was like, yep, we're going to get in there and sort that out. The ridiculousness of it, Michael, is that, it's like my Optus phone not being able to call your Telstra phone. That's what we find out there. There's a plethora of encrypted or secure messaging systems in GP land, ophthalmology, endocrinology, all the ones that we deal with, but they don't all talk to each other. So the government's working on this. We've had some moves with My Health Record and in the digital space as well, because particularly, inflow to and from hospitals is a bit of a basket case at the moment, But that's something that I really want perhaps to flag for your optometry folk is, what is your secure messaging system? We've been talking to or trying to get some of the providers up to date. The response from them is that we're not getting any requests from our paid users for these services. So we're not, super keen to worry about implementing them. But, it is, please exert upward pressure. If you want better secure messaging in your systems, let your provider know. But that's really the space to watch and, and for us to be maybe cautious about in the near future.
Yeah. And what are some of the potential penalties for non-compliance? I mean, are there any examples, without obviously naming who or what, when, but with regards to, what they actually are, what are some of the penalties that are at play?
You bet. Well, if we think about this just from our personal perspective, if there has been a breach, say Medibank or, Optus recently, if your stuff is out there, I want to know about it. So that is where, this 2017 notifiable data breaches bill came in, because in the old days, what was happening is people would lose data and that was it. They'd just sweep it under the carpet, hope for the best. But particularly if you've got things like passwords out there that, we all know that we shouldn't use the same password. A lot of folk do, this kind of stuff. It needs to be notified to the commissioner now, and there's obviously a pathway, there's processes, has it met a threshold where there's a potential for significant harm. But, the penalties are big. So for, individuals, we're talking about penalties of up to 2.5 million, for failing to notify the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. And that's 50 million for corporations. So, we're not talking about small change at the end of the day. They are looking at this seriously. And part of the raft of reviews was that, things like Medibank Private got a slap on the wrist. They are talking about ramping up fines to exert pressure on industry to do a better job of looking after this data that we're technically safe holding for, in my case, for patients.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, and just sort of back to a comment you said earlier where, you wish you were doing this 20 years earlier or something when the internet didn't exist and all this data wasn't so readily available on a platform that it now is, but it's only going to get more intense. And so, as time goes on, you can understand why government is putting pressure in these aspects because, it's going to affect so many people and their potential, livelihoods and I guess just their general privacy and security. Something else that you look at is risk management and legal defense. And it's probably not something that you speak too much on a platform like this, for example, but with regards to what you see in your experience and for the point of view of, optometrists out there that are listening to this, what are some of the most common legal claims you see against optometrists? And more importantly, how can they be avoided?
Yeah, it is interesting from I suppose, a metadata point of view. And it's something we're interested in. We obviously map trends so that we can adjust CPD or resources in those areas. But it's pretty cut and dry. It is failure to diagnose, delay in diagnosis or misdiagnosis. That's 92% of our incidents that progress to claims. So, we obviously have, or we cover regulatory investigations and stuff like that. APRA, that doesn't cost us a lot of money at the end of the day in managing those ones. It's the compensation claims that are obviously the big ticket items. And if you want to get a little bit more granular, it's retina. So glaucoma, AMD, retinal detachment, that's about 54%. Tumours, they are less common, but they're big ticket items. Obviously, because they have such a drastic impact on somebody's life. They're sitting at about 41%. Things like cataract, medication, therapeutics, that's a drop in the ocean. That's 1%, and stuff around glasses and prescription, that's almost negligible. So we're not talking big dollars for those ones.
So it's those medical those medical components and I guess the adequate referral in those situations that perhaps has been neglected or not done, or is it just that they may have been missed altogether? Is that what you're saying?
Essentially, when we get our lawyers to do a deep dive on it, and again, we do analyse this stuff, they've come back to me with three things. So they've said, disease-related litigation and complaints against optometrists follow three common threads. So it's failure to perform a thorough examination, it's failure to follow up on suspicious findings, and it's failure to document the test performed and patient management. And it's that last one that, literally sometimes makes me feel like crying, because I will be talking to someone doing the assist or the medico-legal liaison, and I know they've done it. They haven't written the damn thing down though. And as I get sick of our lawyers saying, look, no record, no defence, you're not giving us anything to work with. We'll go into bat for you. We'll come and fight hard on your case, but you need to give us something, and a lot of it is writing it down. And I've had plenty of time as a locum, I've seen things like a tick for internals. Yes, someone had a retina, great. That doesn't help me in management, but it also doesn't help you when it comes to defending a claim, or WNL, within normal limits, but unless there's some detail there, you may as well have it as we never looked. So, a lot of different subcomponents of it, and obviously happy to dig into it if you want a bit more detail.
Yeah, we'll jump into them, I think, in the next sort of question or two. Sure. But you mentioned documentation there, and you've, I guess, highlighted the importance in defending against legal claims. Documentation, like how important is it, and what are some things that our optoms can do in this regard just to make sure, other than the obvious of taking more notes, I'd imagine, is there anything else, or is it just as simple as that when it comes to helping when defending against these claims, if they and when they do arise?
Yeah. So, I suppose if we're thinking about it in a broad sense, look, communication's key. So, obviously taking the proper case history. A lot of it is educating and informing the patient about their condition or options, but also what to do if it gets worse. So, I find it surprising. A lot of it is this delay to refer. They've had someone who might be 675 or 69 and they've just chuffed them off, but, potentially that's a time to say, look, you've got early cataract, come back. If things are getting worse, you don't have to come back in a year. If it's worse 6 months down the track, let us know. From a documentation point of view, I mentioned I'm still in the field, and I, not on any kind of high castle or anything like that. The one thing perhaps that I have done after, 9 years of talking to the lawyers and helping them is I write down negative history. So for me, this might be retinal detachment. If I've had someone come in with flashes and floaters, sure, that's a trigger. Obviously, for doing a dilated examination, that would be considered the minimum standard of care or what a reasonable practitioner would do. But I am completing my examination and I write no retinal detachment noted, no Schaefer's sign.
Right.
That, for better or for worse, essentially makes me watertight. If that patient wants to go trampolining, 2 weeks down the track or bungee jumping, obviously I warn them not to do those things generally. But if that detachment happens later, that's on them. It wasn't on me, and this is part of the Luke on the OA help desk crying when he talks to people, when it's like, we were so close in fighting that one off, a couple more, like 3 extra words would have made us bulletproof, and there's that doubt, well, did you miss it or not? In that case, the lawyers go, look, Luke looked for that. He didn't see it. He noted it down. We're bulletproof. Go away. We're not, giving you any money. Stop hassling our clients. So, that's something. I'm time poor. We all are. We're all doing so much more these days. Be smart. It's about working smarter, not harder. So, do you have templates that auto-populate and then you adjust for the specific details? We're not talking about writing an essay. I mentioned I'm a contact lens practitioner, but I literally say to everyone, if you are having any problems, you get a red eye, painful, sensitive to light, mucky gunky stuff, take your contact lens out and call me. That's a bit of waffle. You can put that in an auto-populated template and just, I said that, click, one click, it's in there. That's the kind of key for moving ahead into the future with these kind of things, so that we have comprehensive and contemporaneous records that capture what we've said. We have had a claim where, someone had a blazing red eye, gooey, painful, sensitive to light, mucky, gunky. And they said, well, the optometrist didn't tell me to take the contact lens out if there was anything wrong. There is no common sense in the medico-legal arena. You've got to assume, that it's essentially butt covering, but it's a time thing. I realize that there are ways around it. Again, we have guides on efficiency, record keeping. What is the minimum standard? What should we be doing? These kind of resources, again, are back on the OA website.
Yeah. It's probably hard for most optometrists to think about this, but, because when you're in a consultation, you're not necessarily thinking about, well, how would I act if this was, put in front of a judge or part of some type of legal proceeding.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it's an element of that. You have to at least check in with that thought process, I think, once in a while, to note that, well, in these types of situations, I need to cover myself and I need to go on above and beyond that negative note taking with regards to saying what you didn't observe or witness.
And I'm very much about keeping it real or keeping it to something that folk might appreciate. But the one for me that hurts me is that we are getting sued for cataract. That's crazy, like missing a retinal detachment right out near the aura, like not doing indentation or whatever, fine, like I can appreciate, I'll probably miss some of those myself. But, cataract, that's not rocket science, but we get sued for it, not because we've missed it. It's because of that documentation. And that's maybe what I was alluding to before. They might be 6, 7.5. And some of the scenarios I've seen, they got a red eye 6 months later. They went to the GP. The GP says, I don't know what to do with eyes. They send them to an Opthal. Ophthal's got a quiet surgery list, fixes the red eye, says, I'll come back and we'll take that cataract out for you. Next thing you know, 8 months down the track, the Optom's got a letter failure to diagnose cataract. But if in the records, there was a note, NC2, early lens changes, whatever you want to have, discussed lens changes in advice and management, advice to return if it gets worse, then again, you're sound. You've just avoided that lawsuit for, 10 or 12 extra words on the record card. So, it is critical. It's a balancing act between, time and efficiency. No one is saying writing an essay, but that's what I want to flag. Let's think about how can we do it a bit smarter, perhaps, rather than just working harder. Yeah,
and important that we're highlighting it now. You mentioned, the patient doesn't have to come back in 12 months. If you're suspicious of something, come back if you see it getting worse. How can optometrists effectively manage patient recalls in this instance to ensure that there is that continuity of care when it comes to, this risk management and I guess, being sure that we're being as careful as we can be and maintaining our duty of care in this scenario?
Yeah, duty of care is a minefield. Again, a real eye-opener for me being on the other side of it. I'm not on any high moral ground. This is something that I've done poorly for, over a decade. The amount of times that I've given a patient a letter and said, off you trot, go and get that checked out at the ophthalmologist, and I hope for the best. And in most cases that works out fine. But again, real claims, real talk. We have had cases, and the ones that worry me aren't the blazing red eye. That's painful. Those ones are motivated to pop down and get that checked out. But it's more around things like, maybe pressures of 22. You've done a visual field, it's fine. The discs are borderline. Maybe they're 0.6, no notching, that kind of thing. But you say, look, go and get this checked out at the ophthalmologist, whatever. Those are the ones that can come back to bite us in the butt. And we have had one where they didn't attend, they moved house, whatever, lost the referral, come back 5 years later, and they've got visual field loss. What horrifies me is that, we were found at fault in those ones, and it's a failure for follow-up and not applying duty of care to that referral. So obviously that's an extreme case. We get asked a lot around missed appointments or failure to follow up or these kind of things. There's no magic rule. There's a bit of a perception out there that you've got to ring a patient 3 times or that kind of thing. So we do have a duty of care, to make sure that they either attend for their referral or review, or that they make a conscious decision not to do so after appropriate advice. But we don't have to engage in an exercise in futility. The response is basically proportionate to the severity of what would happen if they didn't, attend to that referral or follow that advice. So it can be scaled up or down. Look, it might be a raft of things. Maybe it's a phone call or an email. Obviously, trying different medium are important. This comes back to, basic privacy principles and information, that we have a duty to make sure our information's up to date. We should be checking the phone number and email, as they come in for the appointment. That's part of where these things go wrong. And, look, at the end of the day, particularly for failure to follow advice, I have had, for instance, an old cancer-ridden patient refuse to start glaucoma medication. So, we've done the advice. I've advised him of the consequences of action if he didn't want to do it. And I get it. You're 85, you're riddled with cancer. Your doctor said you've only got 6 months to live. Maybe you don't want to start on those intensive drops right now. You've got bigger fish to fry. But I made sure he had that information around the consequences. And for me, the final letter, I let him sit on it, let him think about it. The final one was a registered letter, so there is no doubt that information or advice was received. So it is very much scalable, no one-size-fits-all approach. But again, the key is, document. That's in my records. I had that conversation. He knows what's going to go wrong or going to happen to him if he doesn't follow my advice. And I've made those attempts that I have to impart that information very clear for him.
Yeah. And definitely talking about the best practices here with regards to that and making sure that's being done. But from me, that follow-up is critical with these instances, and documentation. And it's a combination of those two, and using the mediums that we have at our disposal within the practice with communication points, and making sure that we're effectively using all of those items, collectively, to ensure that we are risk mitigating as much as we possibly can.
Yeah. And in the real world, that takes various forms. Like obviously a lot of the secure messaging systems have that tracked. You can go low tech as well. One of the best practices that I've seen do it, where I've worked, simply had a spreadsheet. Outgoing referrals were logged. When you got the report back from the specialist, they were ticked off. Any of those ones at the end of the month, that we hadn't had anything back from, there's a question mark, did they go to that ophthal or not? They were followed up, and moved to the next month to, again, chase or monitor if there's not that kind of compliance. So it might be a notebook. I've seen that plenty of times. Or for me as a locum on a couple of ones that I knew were pretty full on, it was a diary note, to follow it up at a later date to make sure that they had attended. So a range of options out there.
Something that comes to mind, it's just a question that's popped into my head, is obviously we're speaking about optometrists in particular here, but I'm obviously very mindful that a lot of businesses across the country aren't necessarily optometry owners. They're dispenser owners, or they're not industry related owners. They're just owners of a practice. How do you see that relationship going when you've obviously got the optometrist that's carrying the burden of the weight in this instance with their, reputation, with their licensing, and then you've got, say, a business owner that obviously a lot of the things that we're talking about here are crossing over into business operation and things like that. Can you speak to that in any way?
You bet. I would tell you, you are not safe as a business owner. So this is what we term practice entity.
Yeah.
So you're not. there's no ducking for cover. You're in the firing line as well. When
Well,
things go.
that's so. With these legal proceedings, do they bring the store into it as well, or is it just a practitioner? What do you normally see
Yeah,
in those
absolutely.
instances?
Yeah, look, it's all about. And what worries me, Michael, is we're not America. Thank goodness.
Mm,
People get
mm,
sued at the drop of a hat, ambulance chases, all that kind of stuff. But we are seeing a rise in no win, no fee lawyers.
right.
They take a huge chunk out of the back end, but obviously there's risk, and there's upfront work for no money. It might fall in a hole, but that's the real growth area that I've seen over the last 10 years, and that I don't like. As
Mm,
far as what's the approach, look, it's money at the end of the day. So it's
yeah.
often a shotgun approach. Let's rope in as many players as possible. So, we see
Yeah.
Optoms obviously quite concerned in a lot of cases. There's a request for letter from a lawyer. You're getting roped into the off they're getting sued.
Mm, mm,
They may not
right.
be gunning for you, but you're involved.
You're
They will
part of
look
it.
for as many people as possible to share
Gotcha.
the pie or increase the pie that they can put their sticky little fingers into.
Yeah, and I think the point with that is that even if you're, because a lot of the people that listen to this podcast are business owners, not necessarily optometrists, this is a combined effort. And what I'd suggest here is that
Mm.
as a store owner, as a practice owner, as a practice manager, as an optometrist, these things that was discussed today with regards to, I guess, for a lack of a better term, optometry self-defense,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's through cybersecurity, whether it's through risk management, privacy, or general legal sort of, mitigation and items that we can do to mitigate those circumstances. It's a collective effort, and we've all, I guess as an industry, we've got to come together and be better at
Yeah,
this and
yeah,
continually work on this. I feel so. It's
yeah, yeah.
it's been
There's
it's been an
room
absolute
for
pleasure to
improvement.
talk about it.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's no, and like I said, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk about this. I mean, and
yeah,
it's definitely something that we're probably not speaking about on a regular enough basis, considering how critical it is to our operation.
yeah,
It's one of those things that it's all good until it's not, and it just takes one moment, 1 second, and then the world's flipped up down. In hindsight, you look back and you go, oh, how could I have been so silly, or how could I have been so stupid? But
yeah.
then you look back, and so you don't want to get to those moments. Just as a bit of a take home, we've spoken about cybersecurity, legal compliance, privacy. What are some of the take homes that you'd leave for our listeners today in summary, I guess, and to wrap it all up?
Yeah, look, I mean, I suppose, you pretty much hit the nail on the head. I just don't want them putting their head in the sand. You don't want to be that person. 2020 hindsight's a killer. I often feel like I get the dubious honor of doing the unsexy but often important CPD for Optometry Australia, and often I feel like I'm screaming into the void. So for me, the first time TLC 2018 talking about cybersecurity, nobody cared. Like it
Mm,
wasn't as prominent. We've all, I mean, who didn't get hit with Optus or
yeah,
those other large breaches recently? It's more and more common. Every day, like I was scanning the news yesterday, it's my inheritance has gone to scammers. It is literally happening right now. So the take homes for me is that this is on the rise, and maybe as a sense of perspective, like I did have a look back at when I first started talking about it. So I had a quote from Dan Tehan. He was the Australian Minister for Cybersecurity from mid 2017. First lecture I did on it, he was saying cybercrime costs the Australian economy $1 billion a year. This is absolutely a wake up call. Michael, did anybody wake up? I don't think so. It is last year, cybercrime is $29 billion a year. So we're talking about one crime every 7 minutes. So, that's really the thing for me. This is real. It's happening right now. Get yourself defended. So it's IT hardening. But the important thing, and a gap, 40% of the breaches are staff. Doesn't matter how, if you've got Fort Knox IT security system, there's still a weak
yeah,
link there. So it's that staff training. Cyber wardens, get onto the other stuff that's on the OA website. It is going to be more and more common in the future. And look, from a privacy, maybe crystal ball gazing, AI. That's going to be another
right.
really interesting area. We've got transcribing software. We've got, is it encrypted? What happens to the data after it's been used? Where are the servers? Yada, yada, yada. It's a
Oh,
watch
that's a
this
big can of
space.
worms, that one.
We've got a Optometry Australia AI policy. just at the designer at the moment, about to be released. But, if you're unsure, you're looking at a new software, you're thinking, gosh, is this compliant, and you don't know what you're doing, call it in, get some help. You certainly don't have to navigate this area alone. We've got so much going on. We've got to stay up to date with all the medical, clinical stuff, but a lot of us are running businesses with very little training and very little assistance. But, we're obviously happy to help in that space for members. Don't go it alone. It is complicated.
Yeah.
A wealth of resources out there. But, have a bit of if you've got a little bit of downtime over this quiet period, put it on the to-do list and call out if you need a hand.
Well, absolutely. I think that's the point of our episode today. It's to highlight it. It's to raise it as an area of significance, and then provide some tools that the listeners can act on. And I think that, we've done that. And I feel like there's probably some more episodes sort of in the future with regards to AI in particular, and some other developments that may take place. As you say, it's ever an evolving area, and it's an area that doesn't stop. So I think the more that we highlight it, the better it is for all of us. And like you alluded to earlier on, it's not a matter of if, but when. And I think if you have that mentality with your activities, it'll change the way in your perspective on how you think about it. It's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when. And so prepare yourself for the when as best as you possibly can.
Yeah, you got it.
Luke, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, if they need some support and need some assistance, or just want to reach out with regards to any of the things we've discussed today, where's the best place that they can reach out and find you?
Yeah. Look, my email is l.arundel, so it's l.arundel at optometry.org. As I said, I still work. We have an optometry advisor on deck every day, making sure that we're covering each other. So there's always someone, an optometrist and a well-informed person in that regulation, privacy, cybersec space that you can talk to. And nice. I'll pop that in the links as well, if that's easy.
Absolutely. We'll make that available in the show notes. We went a little bit longer today than we normally would, but I think it's such an important topic. I did want to afford at the time that I think it deserves in that regard. So I really appreciate your time and highlighting these aspects to us and making it known to us. I think they're super important. And thanks so much for your time today, Luke.
A real pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you for joining us on The Focused View, proudly presented by Opticare. It's been our privilege to share the insights and stories that resonate deeply with the eye care community. We hope today's episode has not only inspired you, but also armed you with the practical strategies and innovative ideas to help you enhance your practice and professional journey. If you found value in our conversation, we'd be grateful if you could leave us a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. And share this episode with your colleagues. It helps us reach more eye care professionals like you and grow our community of visionaries. Stay connected by subscribing to The Focused View and visiting our website www.thefocusedview.com.au for additional resources and episode summaries. We look forward to your company again in our next episode. Until then, keep focused. I'm Michael Nasser. Bye for now.